In today's Take It Day, I want to talk about Paul George of the Los Angeles Clippers. And I want to talk about two areas of improvement that I think he can improve on during this season. Now, before we get into that, though, please like, subscribe, also hit the notification bell, just so you can get the newest and the bonus content first. We put out content every day, so you won't miss any content here. Now, let's go ahead and jump right into this. So Paul George has been a star player in the NBA for at least about a decade now. He's been decorated as one of those players that a lot of people look at and say he is a star and he is a really, really good two-way player. He's definitely not as good as Kawhi Leonard as a two-way player, but I definitely think he is up there as far as a two-way player. And, you know, looking at a lot of PG throughout his career, he's definitely been one of those players where I felt like, you know, he definitely is an MVP caliber type player, and he's definitely played to that level on I'd say several occasions in his career. He hasn't won an MVP, but I mean, he's definitely an MVP caliber type player when healthy and when playing at his best. So, you know, one area of improvement that I feel like going into this season that he needs to improve on, just because Kawhi Leonard is not there to make up for some of his woes and his deficiencies. I wanted to speak on two areas, but let's go into the first one now. So the first area I think that he needs to improve on is efficiency. You know, a lot of games last year in the playoffs, and there was a few games before the season was ending, before they went into the playoffs last season, that I looked at Paul George, and there were quarters during a game, whether the first or second or the first and third quarter or something like that, where Paul George would be shooting piss poor horribly, and Kawhi Leonard and other players would be making up for his inconsistency or his lack thereof to help the team get over the hump or win that game or make them more of a solid type team, you know, in the area they need to be solid in. And what I mean by that is, you know, if you look at a lot of games in the playoffs or several games in the playoffs, Paul George, there were first, like in the Dallas series, for example, there were, I know the first and second game, maybe even the third game going back to Dallas, the first quarter and like the third quarter, Paul George shot horrible. Paul George shot very, very insufficient. He was very off, and, you know, he was looking like way off P, play off P, what a lot of people make jokes about. You know, he was looking more like that rather than the Paul George that a lot of people know that he can be, you know, PG-13. And, you know, those are the type of moments that the Clippers can't have, because now Kawhi is not there to make up for some of your deficiencies and inconsistencies, because now it's all on you until Kawhi gets back. And when Kawhi Leonard gets back, you know, it's going to be a situation of Paul George is going to have to carry most of the load, and he's going to have to do it consistently. And there's going to be a lot of games where, you know, they're going to be facing really good teams, and Paul George is going to have to be efficient three out of 4 quarters at least. He can't be efficient 2 out of 4 quarters in a basketball game. It's just really not going to work if that's going to happen. They're going to need Paul George to shoot efficient in these quarters to keep the team rolling in these games, because you can't really, you know, if Reggie Jackson is your second best player, that's a good second best player to have, but that's not a great one to have. And this is what I'm saying. If they want to be 5th, 6th seed going into the playoffs, or maybe a little bit higher, Paul George is going to have to be more efficient. He can't, you know, go the first quarter 5 for 5 and then the second and third quarter 1 for 9. You know, and Paul George has been known for doing things like that throughout his career. And even last year in the playoffs, like I said, he showed that in quite a few games in the early parts of the playoffs, between the first and second round, between Utah and Dallas. And Kawhi Leonard was there to make up for pretty much damn near all of it. And then one game, honestly, Terrence Mann made up for, you know, Paul George shooting bad. That's the game Terrence Mann scored like 39 points off the bench, and it helped them win that game and ultimately win the series. But this is my point. When you have inconsistencies like that in big moments in big games, it only results in one thing, in losses. I mean, can you count on Terrence Mann to put up 39 points again? Maybe not. Probably not. More than likely not. And if he does, it's an additional. It's not a guarantee. So when you look at it from that standpoint, efficiency is going to have to be in Paul George's DNA, and he's going to have to not only take big shots, he's also going to have to make them and be efficient at doing it against the better teams. Because as I said, some people may disagree, but the West is a tough outing. The West has always been tough. I mean, as long as I've been watching basketball, the West has always been tougher than the East, just about. I mean, the East always usually has been a walkthrough, and now you got a couple good other teams in the Eastern Conference. But I mean, honestly, that if the Nets are healthy and if Kyrie gets, on the way he's supposed to be, the Nets should pretty much walk through the East. I don't really see too much competition there. You could say the Bucks, but everybody knows if the Nets were healthy, the Bucks wouldn't be looked at. They'd be an afterthought. So my thing is, Paul George, looking at the West, I mean, you can't count out Golden State. The Lakers are there. I'm not big on the Nuggets as far as looking at them as a true contender. But I mean, hey, they are a team that, can compete at a high level. You know what I'm saying? They did, come back down 3-1 against the Clippers. So they might be one of them teams that have the Clippers number. So this is what I'm saying. That's another team they have to look out for. And, the Phoenix Suns are still around too. So, I mean, it's like it's some competition in the West. You know what I'm saying? So you're going to have to bring it every night, and you're going to have to play at a high level. And the only way Paul George is going to help this team stay afloat until Kawhi Leonard comes back, or if he comes back, is to play at a high level with efficiency throughout the games. It can't be, first and second quarter. By halftime, he's got 19 points at halftime, and then he ends the game with 28 points because he shot poorly in the second half of the game. That's not going to work. That's going to get the Clippers beat every time against the good teams, and then they won't be a playoff team. Then they might find themselves as a play-in tournament team, because it doesn't matter how much talent you have on a team. It all comes down to the head of the snake. And right now it's Paul George, so he has to play live, and he has to be upbeat every night, and he has to be efficient. Now, another part of his game, too, is I always say one thing great players need to have is to be great when it matters the most. One thing I watched, and I've seen it a couple games last year with Paul George. I think it was a game against Atlanta. It was another game they played. And, of course, the one in the playoffs against the Phoenix Suns where Paul George had an opportunity to tie that series 1-1 and missed two free throws that would have been clutch in giving them an upper hand in that series. Because if the Clippers tied that series 1-1 and didn't go down 0-2, I think they beat the Phoenix Suns and go to the NBA Finals even without Kawhi Leonard. And this is my point. When you're in the moments of a game where you need to be clutch and, when it matters the most, that's when you got to come through. And if the Clippers want to win a championship and they want to be that type of team, they're going to need Paul George to have that when it matters most inside of his DNA. Be clutch when you need to be. If there's two free throws and the game is on the line, I expect you to knock them down, because it could be a situation like that in this season and going into the playoffs where they foul Paul George intentionally or something like that to put him on the line at the end of a game because they know he might choke and miss one free throw. Or maybe both, the way he did against the Phoenix Suns. So, to me, another clutch factor in being a great player is you have to be that and do it and execute it when it matters most. And I think that's one element of Paul George's game where that's always been lacking. Paul George has always been a star player in this league, but when it matters most, he's never been that clutch guy for you. And he's never been that clutch guy, for a team to help them get over the hump. Now, I'm not expecting Paul George to do, to improve on these things 100%. But if he can at least improve on them, I'd say 80 to 90% and add these things to his game. Now, of course, if he can do it 100%, that'd be great. But just take a little slack off Paul George. If he can do these things at a pretty high level and be pretty consistent, I think the Clippers can be a formidable playoff team and be a 5th or 6th seed going into the playoffs rather than being a play-in tournament team or a team that, is trying to fight their way into the playoffs. Because to me, the best thing for the Clippers is to, be in that fifth or sixth seed if they can, because that eighth seed, you don't want to be facing the number one team in the first round, and Kawhi is just coming back and everybody's just getting healthy and, all that stuff. You want to kind of face a team where, that you have a good chance of beating, and, you're feeling confident about yourself, and everybody can kind of get going, and they won't be faced with so much pressure that early into the playoffs. You see what I'm saying? So, those are my two things I think Paul George needs to improve on, and do I think he can or will do them? I think he will. I think he will try to improve on things, and of course it remains to be seen if he can do it. But I definitely think those are two things that I feel like he can improve on, and I feel like will definitely help the Clippers a whole lot, going into this season, because they're leaning on him a lot, and because they're doing that, he's going to have to find a way to come through, because I don't think Clippers fans or a lot of people will be excited about anything with Paul George if he doesn't find a way to, come through and, deliver those things for this team, because this team is riding around him right now, and he has to be the one that's going to help this team get over the hump. So, that's my take on the situation there. Leave any comments in the comment section as always, and let me know what you think. Do you think Paul George needs to improve on anything, or you think Paul George is good where he's at and think that the Clippers will be just fine? But leave any comments in the comment section as always, and we'll talk about it and engage in the community as we always do. And hey, Cali out.